Cool. So, by way of sort of a little bit of history of this paper, Genoa and I sort of started independently thinking about the problem that we bring up, sort of this puzzle that we have with indexicals in video games, and decided, we started talking about it, decided why don't we just write a paper on it. We've given this paper once before, and it's a slightly different now from the abstract that we have here. So we talk about monsters in the abstract, and we've been pushed that it's not clear that the cases we present are monster cases, and even if they are, it's not important to our dialectic really. So we're not really going to talk about monsters much. The overall aim is still the same. Yeah. So, our business for today is to present a sort of plausible story of two very good friends who play World of Warcraft, set up for semantic theories, give you a series of cases which problematize the semantic theories and suggest that none of them tell the right story, and suggest a plausible upshot, which is less clear than everything else we're going to say. So that's something that would be nice to get some feedback on what sort of the upshot of what we're saying is. So, our story. So once upon a time, Anna and Mia are two who are invited to play World of Warcraft together. And on your handout there's a World of Warcraft taxonomy for things we're going to say, so for those of you who aren't giant nerds. So Anna and Mia are members of a guild, that's a group of players who play together. The guilds all communicate with each other using headsets and in-game chat. So Anna and Mia log into World of Warcraft and begin their quests together. Anna logs in as Stefano, and Mia logs in as Zia. Later, Anna and Mia take part in a raid to defeat a dragon from Deathwing. The raid progresses, and eventually Anna becomes tired and stops playing the game.
Alright, so do you guys all get the scenario they were setting up? So, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the RPG setting. Some say no, some say yes. So like RPG game is pretty much, you play as a character, and you can choose your character's job, you can choose your character's race, whatever it is, and you gain a skill set, and the game gives you a quest to do. So the quest that we have right now is to kill a big dragon. And a group of people are actually aiming to kill this big dragon together. So that is the whole setting. So then what happens here is I'm going to explain all the semantic theories that we are going to run through. So we have 4 semantic theories, and we are going to run through the 4 semantic theories in this specific case scenario. And we are going to say that none of these semantic theories work to explain how indexicals work in this specific context of RPG. So to spoil our research results, you can turn the back of your handout and we have all the results. But I'll go through everything step by step, how we drive tables. So we are going to compare 4 different semantic theories. So the first one is the traditional Kaplanian semantic theory. So we all know it's called the standard semantics, and it's a familiar semantic theory of indexicals, and Kaplan considers indexicals to be directly referential with their semantic content determined by the following rules. So for every context C, so Ci is the order of C, C here is the location of C, so C now is the time of C. So if I say I'm here now, G1 is here in Genoa at 10-ish. So it's very intuitive and everyone can understand this. Then Michelson comes in. Elliot Michelson's paper 2014. Michelson kind of develops Kaplanian semantics, and so my original paper that kind of pushed me to write this paper was his paper on answering machine puzzle. I don't know if you guys are familiar with attention puzzle. It is it is always true that when I say I'm here now, it is always true. So then if I say, well, I'm not here now, then it automatically becomes it's false that I'm not here now. But if that sentence is uttered in a, played by an answering machine, so let's say you call me, and my answering machine in my office says, well, this is G1, I'm not here now, leave me a message, and then I'm not here now sentence kind of sounds true. So then philosophers of language try to explain why I'm not here now sentence sounds true. So Michelson tries to explain the answering machine puzzle by changing the Kaplanian characters and rules by adopting the rules into like every single context. So he kind of gives an example of like a postcard where you say, well, I'm here now, I'm enjoying the sun in the conference. So then when the postcard, actually, if I say I send that postcard to Paul, then he's gonna read it like 3 days later. So then I'm here now would be false, but like how is it true that he reads it as true that I'm here in Genoa on the like 24th of May, and then I'm enjoying the sun. So he changes it into, well, it's a here and now that changes depending on the context. Or you can say, what else? I guess. So he goes through like different contexts and say the rules kind of changes. So he says, the Michelson defends the Kaplanian aim to provide a theory of sentence in context rather than a theory of utterances only confined to face-to-face context. So the references of indexicals should be evaluated relative to different character rules. So the character rules which determine the content of indexicals I here now should remain constant. So I refer to the agent, here to the location, now the time of the context. So this is very Kaplanian, but what it changes is this. Indexicals are to be evaluated at a context of interpretation according to a rule that is self-determined by what sort of communicative channel is used to deliver the message of that context. So it changes according to the communicative channel. So it changes every time we choose a different communicative channel. So even though the typology of so his view is called shifty character view. So the typology of shifty character view seems ad hoc. Michelson replies that ad hocery is virtuous because the semantic theory should responsibly explain our best data, including the intuitions of competent language users on the truth and falsity of sentences and observed regularities of token sentences in various contexts. So I hope what Michelson wants to say becomes clear as we go through each cases by case in our examples. And the next philosophers that we want to go through is Egan. Actually, I wanted to change the order of presentation. So let's talk about Predelli first. So he puts importance on the intention of the speaker. So the context of interpretation of a context C is a context C at which the speaker of C intended the speech act to perform the C to take place. In utterance of sentence S in a context C express the content obtained by evaluating S with respect to C. So whatever I say I'm here now, when I say I'm here now, it is my intention to say, well, G1 is in Genoa 10-ish. So then whatever speaker intends, it is very important. So what Egan develops in his paper is, well, he thinks, well, here, what here intends to hear is also important. So he says, so by which the semantic value of context, sensitive expressions, paradigmatically, indexicals are not merely sensitive to the features of the speaker's context, but admit some sensitivity to features of the audience's context as well. So he says, the sensitivity to features of speaker and hearer context is expressed by the semantic value of the expression being set by a combination of communicative intention of the speaker and the communicative intention of the hearer. So the communicative intention is fixed by the positional content of the speaker and the hearer. So when I say, I'm here now, and Paul hears, I'm here now, so I intend to speak that Arjuna is here now, he intends to hear that Arjuna is here now. So that's what makes it possible, the meaning of the sentence, I'm here now, is fixed. So likewise, I hear positional content is understood using the same variables there x instead picks out the here of the utterance. And so the content of the utterance in question is settled by a combination of two sets of positional contents, the speaker and the hearer. So we're going to run through these 4 positions with our test cases.
So, we have our first case. So, invited to play World of Warcraft together on Saturday afternoon. Anna arrives at Mia's house, rings the doorbell. Anna shouts, "I am here now." Recognizing Anna's voice, Mia opens the door. And spoiler, this is an easy case for everyone. Kaplan is not just to get the right result. I refer to the speaker here to the time, here to the location now, now to the time. We're not, as a rule through this paper, we're not really going to consider now. It's only really I here that do any philosophical work. Because Kaplan gets it right, Michelson gets it right. For Egan, the positional content of Anna's utterances, Anna's in the actual world at the time of utterance, and Anna is the speaker. Mia's positional content is she's in the actual world at the time of utterance, and the hearer is Mia. That's actually a typo. Oops. So the combined context produces a semantic content that settles it that I refers to Anna, here to Anna's physical location, and now to the time of utterance. And Predelli says that the context of interpretation that Anna intends to refer to is herself when she says I, and Mia's front door when she says here. So that's all pretty straightforward. Yeah, everyone gets a green box. So, case number 2. So Anna and Mia are playing together in the same room. To complete a quest together with Mia, Anna decides to meet Mia at Onyxia's lair, a location in game. As Vanna says, context shifts to game chat. I refers to the character Vanna, here to the virtual location, and now to the actual time. So Michelson gets a green tick. Egan suggests that the prediction is that the positional content of Anna's utterance is the actual world, the time of utterance, and Anna. And Mia's physical location matches Anna's physical location, so the positional content understood by the hearer can be understood in one of 2 ways. So either Mia's audience context is based on her matching physical location, so it's the button on the side for the. So we get this as the positional content, or it's her matching virtual location, so the location of her character Zia and Vanna. So the world, the virtual world T would be the current time, and the audience context would be Zia. And it doesn't seem like we have a principled way to decide between which of these we pick. So Egan gets a bit of a question mark in this case. It's kind of underspecified how you would pick out the appropriate positional content in this case. And Predelli, context of interpretation is that Anna intends to refer to Vanna when she says I, and the location of Vanna when she says here. So all to the good. So Kaplan gets a big red X. Michelson and Predelli get the green ticks, and Egan gets a bit of a question mark. We're not really sure what to think about that sort of case. So, case 3. So, Anna and Vanna's raid group, Vienna Square, fight the dragon Deathwing. Anna's character Vanna sustains significant damage during the encounter on their team communication system, so on their headset. Anna shouts to the headset, "I need healing now." Mia is still in the same room as Anna. Again, Michelson can give us a rule to analyse this case. I refer to the character Vanna, now to the time of utterance, and here to the location. Egan, similar to the last case, there are 2 possible audience contexts for Anna and Mia. Anna's actual location, actual world, time of utterance, and Anna, and the virtual location, virtual world, Zia, and time of utterance. But there's also a third context here because Anna's on the headset speaker. There is the guild members on voice chat for whom the positional content is the virtual world, time of utterance, and guild members. And again, we need to pick between the 2 contexts for Mia. And it seems like Mia's positional content should match as closely as possible the other audience members. So we have something like a principled way to pick between Anna's actual location or the virtual location, because there are other audience members in the virtual location. So we should favour B. So we can get a great thing. Predelli, so the content interpretation is that Anna intends to refer to Vanna when she says I, and the location of Vanna when she says here. So, all good. Good text for everyone, except Kaplan, who's not looking good. So, a slightly different version of this case. So, unbeknownst to the game members, there's a bot that is some sort of computer-operated character in game. The bot's character sustains significant damage during the encounter. On the team communication system, the bot types in the chat room, I need healing now. Microson treats this exactly the same as case 3A. I refers to the character, that should say the bot. And now it's the time of production. So the positional content of the bot looks the world is virtual world, time of utterance is T is time of utterance and X is the bot. So the speaker context is the semantic content of the utterance. It's something like the bot needs healing. And the audience context is the virtual world as well, so they match up. But we suggest that for Predelli there was no speaker intention in this case. This is something we pushed on a little bit, but because it's a bot, there's no speaker intention, so there's nothing to provide a basis of analysis for this sentence. So we have a red box, but this might be better to actually work as a question mark. Yeah. So, case 4. So, Mia's cat unexpectedly jumps onto Anna's lap and scratches her leg. At the very same time, Anna's character in-game is damaged by the scary dragon death. Through the headphones, Anna says, I am hurt. So, we suggest that there's two possible ways to analyse the sentence. One is Anna is saying something in the real world, the cat's hurt me, I'm hurt. And one is Anna saying something in the virtual world, the cat's hurt me, the death thing's hurt me, I need healing. And for Microson, the context of utterance seems to match both game 1 and game 3. So it can refer to Anna in the actual world, or Vanna in the virtual world, or both. And there's no principled rule to say for Microson to pick out which context is the correct context to understand the semantic content of this utterance. So this, we think, is sort of problematic for Michelson's view. They can't really give a good rule to say which is correct. So for Egan, Anna's positional content is actual world time of utterance Anna, and the here can be understood in one of the two ways, either the Mia who's next to her, or Zia, the virtual context. But again, Anna's guild members hear the utterance, so there's their positional content is virtual world, time of utterance, and the audience are guild members. And it gives us that again gives us a principled way to prefer which of the two positional contexts for Mia we should prefer for choosing the semantic value. But it seems like there's something like a true utterance with the semantic content. Anna is her matching A, so it seems like there's sort of no really principled way to pick out for even which utterance is right. Again, this is the case for sort of it's confusing rather than being a worry maybe a massive worry for Egan. And for Predelli, there's two ways to analyze this case. Either Anna intends to refer to herself and say, oh, well, the cat scratched my leg, or Anna intends to refer to her character, or she intends to refer to both, and that seems not entirely impossible. But it relies on speaker intention, so Predelli is the semantic value right. Okay. This is the last. This is the last case. So yeah. So after a long night of raiding, it's time for a break. So in the game chat room, Anna types, "I need a break now. I'm leaving myself here for 10 minutes." And this is based on things I've actually said in game. So that's it's something that, even though it seems to erode, it is something people say. and Anna leaves the keyboard to get up and stretch her legs. So Michelson can say something like, there's a character rule away from keyboard, and the indexal I and myself could refer to either the player or the character. However, it seems pretty difficult to specify a rule here. The I, which appears as in the subject position, here appears to refer to the actual player, and the I, the myself, so the reflexive first person, appears to refer to the character. But this is not always the case. Because we can say something like, and this is again something that's actually been said, I end up right now, I want to kill myself for playing. The utterance myself here doesn't refer to the character, it refers to the player. So there's no hard and fast rule that says if the myself appears after the verb, then it refers to the in-game character. So Predelli, Anna seems to refer to Anna when she says Anna, and a character when she says myself, and this gets sort of a question mark for reasons in a moment. And for Egan, the speaker positional content is actual world time of utterance Anna, and the audience positional content is virtual world time of utterance guild members. So the combination of this speaker and hearer intention allows for the making sense of the indexial use. However, it's not problematic since it suggests that the indexial term I refers to Anna, and the indexial myself refers to Anna when used by the same speaker in the same utterance, which is slightly puzzling. So everyone gets a question mark because Michelson can't specify a rule. Egan is in the same sort of problem. I and myself refer to the player and the character separately in the same utterance, and for Predelli, a little bit problematic, but it seems odd for I and myself to shift reference, but in the same utterance by the same speaker. There's our nice finished table.
I guess so far you understood our intention why we chose the title Who Am I, the virtual me, because it's not problematic not too problematic where what into which here and now refers, but I is very problematic. Like what does I refer to? Is it the character? Is it me who's a real player outside of the game? So we want to question like what I refers to. So we feel like, well, Kaplan, he always fails. His semantics up here is sufficient to explain every case that we went through. Michelson, like there can be a new rule that explains every single case, but he can say, well, in this specific case, let's provide this rule to explain. But the thing is, since the sentences come first, like the rules describe the usages, so they appear to be descriptive rather than prescriptive. And so Kaplanian semantics is designated to have a predictive power, whereas Michelson's proposal has no predictive power. It just describes every time as it appears in a game, he just describes. It's not a rule. For Egan, there's no principled way to decide whether this rule is better than this one in this specific context. So without a principled way to understand the contribution of audience and speaker intention, there are contexts in which we cannot predict the indexical functioning. So for Predelli, I think only he got the what case, he could not explain the what case. But I think one of the worries that we had was that the speaker intentions must be transparent for this view to make sense. So game forces us that this is not always the case. So like when Anna says, I'm hurt, obviously she meant to say, my legs hurt. Or you can say, well, obviously my characters hurt. But the thing is, the audience will never know what she intends. So the intention is never transparent. So we will not ask Anna, well, what do you mean when you say you're hurt? Obviously audience will just understand it as if her characters hurt. Or they will never know that the cat hurt her leg. So then, so it is problematic that her intentions are never transparent to the audience. So this is a negative part of our paper. So the first part, we ran through all the cases and we say, well, none of the semantic theories explain our cases. So this is kind of, it's interesting, but we want to say like more interesting things in our later paper but like, so then what theory can explain our cases? So we want to either advocate like pragmatic first approach where pragmatic considerations are primary in working out our theories, well, we just know. Or we want to consider Steinlager common ground where all the game players, they know that we are playing this game and the common ground changes every time something like is added on, but we're not sure. So we want like feedback on like how we can develop the next part of the paper. And we have more interesting cases, and we don't know how to explain these cases. So the game 6 cases, resurrection in 6 minutes. So in Onyxia's player, Anna's character died because of disconnection. Like Wi-Fi kind of went off. And Anna had to wait 6 minutes until her character responds. So responding means, so when a character dies in the World of Warcraft, you've got to wait until the body kind of resurrects. And so you're still connected to the server, so you can like chat to people, like your soul is there, but your body is dead. So other players look for Anna's help, and she like, where are you? And she types in the raid chat room, I'm dead, I'm not here now to help you guys. So like, how do you explain this case? The next one is interesting too. So it's obvious difference. So Anna and Mia attend the face-to-face meeting of their guild. So Anna and Mia over here, so they like went to a pub together, a guild, and they don't know who they are. But they say, well, let's meet at a pub at like specific time of the day, and we're gonna talk about our guild. So then they go, and they overhear a stranger talking. He utters, I killed that thing last night. And Anna and Mia make an inference based on their experience of their raid last night that Valkyries killed Onyxia last night. So that thing last night. So the stranger is Valkyries, their guild leader. But like I killed that thing last night. So the I refers to his character, but it's kind of odd that in the traditional semantics, I killed that thing last night. When you say it, it refers to himself, but himself did not kill the dragon. So wait, how do you explain this? So our test is completed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I liked it a lot. But I think that you're being a little unfair to Kaplan, so I'm gonna try to defend him. And I think that he could try to respond to your examples by using the speaker's semantic reference distinction. I know that this distinction is problematic, and it's one of the things that are being discussed in the context dependence debate, but that's not the same as saying that every context dependence example is problematic to the speaker's reference, semantic reference distinction. For example, Kaplan could say that in all your examples, what the speakers literally say was literally false, but that everybody in the examples understand what the speakers were trying to say. Everybody in the examples understand what the speaker's reference was, even if what they were trying to say was not the same to what they literally said. So for example, I think that what you're saying is very similar to, let's imagine that we are in the matrix. If we are in the matrix, everything that we say is false, there is no external world, so I say there is a building outside, but there is no building outside because we are in the matrix. Today is Monday, well, today is not Monday, we are in the matrix again. Now everybody is going to understand what I'm saying because we share the illusion that it's Monday or the illusion that there is a building, but what I'm saying is literally false because we are in the matrix.
So, I think these cases are really importantly different from matrix-type cases for obvious epistemic reasons. So the characters in these cases there's not the skeptical failure to have knowledge. The characters are well known the difference between the virtual world and the actual world. So saying that the cases are like matrix cases, that sort of really just papers over that, and it's quite a significant difference, and it should be. We shouldn't just ignore the epistemology of the cases. do the semantics. And also, I kind of agree, we're really unfair to Kaplan here. I know this seems to be something like a tradition in literature, but also we kind of cut them out for space constraints as well. But in case, even given the speaker reference, the reference distinction you suggest, case 3b is still problematic, because it's just not really clear what the reference, what the intended reference is in that case at all. That's the I need healing, the cat case. I'm not sure what to say about that. I see something more.
Okay, it's not clear, just in case, but in case the intentions of the speaker are not clear. If the speaker, I don't know if who was the speaker, I don't remember, but if she has two intentions to speak about the character and speak about herself, then yes, there is a problem there. But if she has just one intention, that might be not as difficult to explain. For example, if she has the intention just to speak about the damage on her leg, even though it was the case just by accident that her character was hurt at that time, that was like an accident, but she was trying to speak about her leg. So the case is problematic if she has two intentions to speak about herself and to speak about the character.
And that's not completely implausible.
Okay. Right. So I want to make a time comment that is relevant, and then to ask you again what my problem was. So the comment was I'd rather have the view not presented in terms of referential intentions. It's not my intention to refer. It's my intention to be, there are environmental intentions, if you want to situate myself in a particular context. Then the reference gets automatic, right? That's the Kapplanian side of the thing. So that's why it's not a Humpty Dumpty kind of view. Right, let's put it like that. But anyway, that's a dramatic thing that makes no difference for your argument. So what was the problem in that case? You want I to refer to some dude who doesn't exist, right?
Yeah, or to something that doesn't have intention.
So it's a
Right.
computer thing.
Right, yes, exactly. So the fictional is not important. It could be a cash machine that says, I am out of cash, for example, right? And the speaker being the machine, doesn't have intentions. Right, I see. But now I'm worrying whether those are really utterances to begin with. Because regardless of my view, for example, some things surely depends on the speaker intention. Maybe resolution of lexical ambiguity, which bank did you mean? Maybe typos, right? There's a typo. And in those cases, you can't tell, so that can't really be an utterance, right? It's something that has all the makeup of an utterance, and then we interpret it as if it was an utterance, but in that case it's not so implausible to think that some postulated or fictional intentions.
I think I disagree. Yeah, I think we disagree.
Two short questions. Last.
Well, one was kind of a finger on the first question, actually. I just wondered about, so a lot of the worries with that cat case, the cat versus the injury, seem to be about publicity, about, well, the speaker's not making their intention public. But I wasn't sure why that wasn't just a worry about communication. It's a communication failure rather than a straightforward semantic failure. So, yeah.
I think that's a pretty plausible way to answer the case. That's responding to sort of what we're thinking about the positive account. We think that's how to answer that case for the common ground type view.
So
I was just wondering about the relation between case 5 and the others. Case 5 seems to be the kind of, this is supposed to be the knockdown, like no one can handle case 5. But it's also, the problem with case 5 is that we have a pronoun and a reflexive, which are supposed to be co-referential. Binding theory tells us they have to be co-referential, but they're not. But that doesn't turn essentially on this being this kind of video game case like the others. It's just, in general, we have a real problem with cases like cases where we use a reflexive to pick out something different. And I don't know if you know Jack stuff on this. He has all these papers on these sorts of violations. But then it just seems kind of unfair to turn on these specific theories of indexicals and say you can't handle violations of binding theory. Well, no one can. No one knows what to do in these sorts of cases. So that one seems relevantly dissimilar from the other cases in that it's just a much broader kind of worry.
I'm not sure if you're claiming that much of a strong, it's more of a question mark than a X.
Yeah, so I was looking particularly your work with Predelli, where you said, sure, maybe the intentions can do this, but in general, we don't want it to be the case that intentions can override binding theory. And so then you just said something like, isn't it weird that I and myself can pick out different things? I would have thought the answer is, yeah, it is weird, but it happens in and outside of video games.
Well, let's cut the...
Okay, my name is Hu Yao, and I'm very pleased to present my work, and this work is part of my doctoral thesis. Okay, I'm very pleased to present you my work, and this work is part of my doctoral thesis. And my topic today concerns context, or the role of context in utterance interpretation. And as Professor Borg and Predelli showed yesterday, that we may have the three levels of semantic content that we were focusing on semantic content. But I think that behind the three notions of semantic content, literal content, explicator, and implicator, and we have also a very important notion of the context, and that's the point in this talk. And so the first question that's very natural, what is the context? And this is very incredibly big question, and we may begin with our ordinary and intuitive use of the context. That means that what the context can do for us, for certain purpose. And the first maybe is that we often use context to assign semantic content of some expressions like indexicals, like I today, here, that, tomorrow, that. That's a very common thing. And we use the context to fix indexical references. And the second, also, we can say that we use context to interpret utterances. And the context is also employed to interpret utterances in communication. When one said that Johnson is good at English, and what one intends to mean maybe that Johnson is not good at philosophy. That's very common. That means that we need context to make plausible the inference from what is said to what is meant. And that's the two main use of context for some purposes. And we also have the tricky cases like Tommy is ready and Joe is told there's nothing to eat. And for some contextualists that we need the context to add to some elements for giving this sentence have the semantic values. And maybe for is that there is no contextual involvement in these three sentences. That for the first two cases that we are all in Poland, that we need the context to do to fit the UNESCO reference and for figuring out implications. And then, corresponding to our two views of context, and we have two main series of context, and we all know that we have the parameter sets theory from Kaplan, and for Kaplan, then that the context is a parameter set in which there are the elements like the speaker, time, place, etc. And then we also have the common ground theory from Stoneacre, and a context common ground. And what is a common ground? A common ground is a body of information commonly presumed by the participant at some point in a conversation. So that's the common ground theory. And in my talk, when we talk about the role of context in author's interpretation, that it is necessary to be clear in the first place that we use the Stoneacre's definition of context. So we have the common ground series here. And then, as my title shows, that the context utterance interpretation. So what counts as utterance interpretation? And then I remember that yesterday Professor Borg gives the notion of question and discussion given by robots. And in her papers 2004 and 2012, that she gives us a model of how the contextual elements contribute to an utterance interpretation. So the elements in her specification of the context, there are four elements. The first is the question under discussion, and this notion reflects what is being addressed at some point in the process of communication. That for the same utterance, Pankow has chosen an Italian restaurant, and if we have the different question and discussions, and this same utterance provides different answers. If the question is who is choosing the restaurant, and this is Pankow, this word can give us the answer. And if the question is which restaurant that we want to go, that is the Italian restaurant provides us the question. And also, I want to give more details about this notion that for robots that we have the two kinds of questions under discussion. And the first level is a super question. And if we talk about French foreign policy, and the topic is about the French foreign policy, and the super question in this talk is what is the French foreign policy. But there are also sub-questions. The sub-questions may be what are the principles according to which the foreign policy is led in France, or what is the French foreign policies relative to China, to other countries. So that we have the super question, and also we have the sub-questions. And the second element in Gross model is domain goals, and domain goals correspond to sub-questions that if we want to change ideas about what the French foreign policy is relative to Russia, that the domain goal that we want to know the things around this topic. And the second is common knowledge, and common knowledge is just a common ground defined in still thinker's way. And the fourth is discourse reference, and they are the identities of objects involved and referred to in the process of conversation that the people or the objects. Okay. So a little bit small comments on robots that. So I argue a lot in my thesis, so this is so long. I'm giving the time. So I just want to say that Doctoral spells out how these 4 types of contextual elements contribute to assertive content, or how to figuring out the implicators. Or maybe the hypothesis that one, this model can be profitably revamped, and 2, that and 2 is that from this revamped model I will present later, the context dependence of assertive content will show a hierarchic organization, and that such a hierarchy enables us to see how the context contributes to interpreting what is asserted in a structurally organized way, which is unfortunately, as far as I'm concerned, is ignored in Grover's account. In other words, I think that Grover does not account for the interaction inside the context. I think that inside the context, there is a hierarchy that when divides several clear hierarchies, that we can see that how the contextual resources as a whole, as an integrated whole, contribute to alternate interpretation. And this motivates the following revamped model that I want to give. And the first one is question discussion that I don't want to touch. The second I call it the explanatory task. I want to use this notion to capture the role of the size in a conversation. That this notion means that when interlocutor produce an utterance, and this means that he or she is a task giver. What the task? The task is come to interpret this utterance, and at the same time that we have the task receiver, that the hero take this role. That I want to use this notion to capture the role, the two sides, the participants in a conversation. And then I want to call this the QUD and the explanatory task as the meta context layers. Why? I think that if we define the context in Stelmacher's way, I think that in this QUD and ET cannot be covered by this definition. And context helps participants in a talk exchange to identify that the speaker is actually asking a question by prima facie stating a fact. And that's what we take for granted is in fact a question speaker intends to ask. And also when you see that and we can also identify by context that the real question the speaker intends to ask is not, are you at home? but can I see you? So in a way that the context and their discussions themselves tells of what the explanatory task is, but they cannot do what the context do. So I think that these are two made-up context layers. And then we have the context information in use set. And in this set, there are also the pieces of contextual information. And while I call it the contextual information in use set, because when a talk happens, there are so many things around. So there are so many contextual information that we can drive for understanding what we are talking about. So we are capable of capturing or selecting the pieces of contextual information which can be used for doing or for helping us to tackling the explanatory task. That means that when a task is given, that we can select the pieces of contextual information which can be used for tackling the task. So that's why I call it the contextual information in use set. In this set, we have also pieces of contextual information which is defined in a Stelniker's way. And then the next one is what we call it the Stelniker context set. In this set, the elements of the set are possible words among which the interlocutor intends to distinguish. And it also represents the possibilities of the results of author's interpretation. This set is constrained by the contextual information use set, and which of the possible words can be distinguished depends on the pieces of contextual information in use. One possible word is distinguished as a result of the author's interpretation, and its propositional counterparts would be possibly added to the contextual information in use context. That's the process of how the contextual information in use set change. And then we can say that we can give this the general account of this model that giving QED in the conversation guides the interlocutors in how to use the relevant utterance to respond to QED. And then we said each utterance corresponds to reason and task. Therefore, QED determines the explanatory task. In turn, the explanatory tasks constrain the contextual information in use set in the sense that the pieces of contextual information in this set are or must be actually used for the tasks. Then the Stelniker task set is constrained by the contextual information in use set. Which of the possible words can be distinguished depends on the pieces of contextual information. Well, possible word is distinguished as a result of author's interpretation. What are asserted by the authors would be possibly added to the contextual information in use set. And the left is the whole picture that you can see that the first level of the meta-context is the QED, and then the explanatory task. They control, they constrain the contextual information in use set. And then we can see that here is still Stelniker context sets. So that's the whole picture I present in our general accounts. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. So just a kind of clarificatory question. I wasn't quite sure. So you have this notion of the explanatory task, and I wasn't sure who's fixing that. Is that fixed by the speaker or by the hearer or by some kind of notion of what's going on in common ground? Or I just wondered if you could say a bit more about it. I wasn't really quite clear.
Yes. The task, in fact, when producing the task is just the producing utterance. So why say one utter one sentence, and at the same time, in fact, I give the explanatory task to you, and you are the task receiver. So that this I want to use this notion to capture that there are the task giver and task receiver. So we can see that the speaker is the task giver in this model. This is just a general model, so it means many arguments in this.
Well, Lucas, everybody's convinced of this model. Thanks.
Hello everybody, thank you all for being here, and thank the organizer for having me here today. What I'm going to talk today is about the role of minimal propositions. My objective today is to present an objection to minimal semantics, but I'm going to make like a precision first. My objection, what I'm going to say here today is not like, I'm not going to argue that minimal semantics are wrong. I'm just going to argue that there is an explanative code that minimal semantics need to fix for us to judge the theory accurately. So, what I'm going to think today is that minimal propositions should have a role in explaining how intuitive propositions are determined, and I believe this is an explanation that minimal semantics have not given us, and that we should have because of the commitments of the theory. So, because of time, I'm going to rush a little bit I'm going to rush the introduction, but I hope it's not too big a problem, because we also yesterday defined what minimal semantics are about and what is the problem of the explanative role. So, I'm going to start. Okay, as we saw yesterday, minimal semantics is a proposal according to which every well-formed sentence expresses a full proposition that is completely determined by the linguistic meaning of the syntactic components of the sentence and the order. Context sensitivity is triggered by the syntactical elements of the sentence, and the set of context-sensitive expressions is not determined by common contextualist arguments like the incompleteness argument or the context shift arguments. So, minimal propositions, as we saw yesterday again, are the propositions that are the minimal proposition that a sentence expressed is the proposition determined by the syntactic element, by the meaning of the syntactic element of the sentence and the order. So, to this proposal, we know that there is two main objections. I'm going to focus on one of them. This main objection is that there is no explanative role for the minimal proposition. I think that there are some handout left. Oh, yes, I have. Okay, there is a handout. Okay, so we have two responses to this objection that I call the objection of the explanative role. One response is the one given by Kaplan and Borg in 2005. They believe that the role of minimal propositions is that they are a minimal defense against misunderstandings. According to they, minimal propositions are what a competent speakers get if they don't share the context, if there is no context, of they don't understand what the context is. So the other response is the one that we got from Professor Borg, that is that minimal propositions' role is to distinguish between different speech acts. So now we're going to start with the fun fact. Okay. As we saw yesterday, one of the main commitments of minimal semantics is with compositionality. For example, Kaplan and Borg write something like, "This is all about compositionality." Now, Professor Borg doesn't put it in those terms. She believed that the main commitment of minimal semantics is with formal theories, but an essential characteristic of formal theories is that they are compositional. So one of the main things that minimal semantics want to defend is that there is a compositional view of language. But now, as a lot of people believe, the best reasons we have to hold compositionality is to explain productivity and systematicity. To save some time, I'm going to focus on productivity today, but it's the same argument for both things. So, what's productivity? In short, a language is productive if competent speakers of L can produce and understand novel sentences of L that have as their components the vocabulary the speakers already know, despite speakers have, as we know, limited capacities like memory, reasoning skills. So, again, what do we want comprehension to explain productivity? There are some people who believe that that the best reasons to call compositionality are methodological. I have reasons to believe that that is false, but I'm not going to argue that today because minimalists agree that we should hold compositionality in order to explain productivity and systematicity. So let's start with the argument. So minimal propositions are the compositional contents proposed by the theory. Being so, they should do the explanatory task that compositionality has. The explanatory task that compositionality has is to explain productivity and systematicity. So minimal propositions should be useful for explaining productivity and systematicity. But now, I'm arguing here that a good explanation about productivity and also about systematicity requires of an explanation of how intuitive propositions are determined. Why is this so? This is so because the majority of the examples we have productivity, how do we know a language is productive is by looking at how the speakers use the language. In other words, when speakers engage in communication, when they are conversating, they are productive all the time. They produce new sentences and they understand new sentences in communication, in conversations all the time. But to explain productivity, it's not just about syntactic or linguistic objects, but it's also about the meanings. And what are the meanings? Which are the meanings that the speakers are intending to express and understanding when they are understanding and producing new sentences? Well, intuitively express propositions. When they interpret a sentence, a new sentence, they normally interpret an intuitive proposition, not a minimal proposition. And when they produce a new sentence, they have the intention to communicate an intuitive proposition, not a minimal proposition. So, to explain, to have a good explanation of productivity, we need an explanation of how intuitive propositions are produced in this context. So, therefore, it follows that the role of minimal propositions should be to explain how intuitive propositions are determined. Well, finally, I hope that some of the things that I'm not going to say are going to come up in the discussion, but why I think that this is something that we haven't explained, something that is also problematic. Well, first, there are several ways in which we could try to explain how the minimal propositions help us determine the intuitive proposition, and several of them have problems. Of course, I'm not going to speak about all of them, but for example, one option that we have is to use a aggregation theory, not just to send everything, every intuitive proposition as an implication. That, of course, has a problem because we have an overgeneration of implicatures. It doesn't seem like a very possible theory to believe that all non-literal communication is called implicatures. Another option that we have is to use some processes that contextualists have proposed, like expansion or mechanisms like that. To use those mechanisms, for the minimalists to use those mechanisms is not like straightforward, because the contextualists, what the contextualists say is that the content of sentences is not complete. So to have mechanisms that complete the semantic content of a sentence is very straightforward. If the semantic content of a sentence is not complete, then we need some mechanism to fill the holes in the content of a sentence, but minimal propositions are complete contents. So we would need a reason to believe that there are some mechanisms that put more information on those propositions, given that they are complete. I'm going to stop there. I hope that some comments that are important are going to come up in the discussion, and thanks everybody.
Thank you for your talk. It's just a clarification question. I'm not sure whether I understand what you mean by intuitive propositions, and I guess that's an important point to understand the argument. In particular, I'm not sure whether I understand the difference between an intuitive proposition and a minimal proposition. So, if you could just make an example of what an intuitive proposition is in your intellect.
Okay, intuitive propositions are the propositions that are commonly reached by context. So, for example, let's say that, for example, let's say that you believe something like the domain is not restricted by the meaning of the classification. So the minimum proposition would be a proposition with an unrestricted domain. And the intuitive proposition would be a proposition that has a restricted domain. That's an example if you believe that the domain is not restricted. But the general difference is that minimal propositions are completely determined by the features of the sentence, and intuitive propositions are propositions that are enriched by context, and a lot of times this enrichment is not guided by the meaning of the syntactic elements of the sentence.
So
Well, thanks very much. I really enjoyed that talk. It's really interesting, and I definitely agree with you that there's the potential for something a bit slippery going on when minimalists like me appeal to productivity and systematicity, because you're quite right that most of the evidence for that comes from facts about language use, but we want to say that the use content, the kind of speaker meanings, what we call the intuitive propositions, are the result of kind of massive amounts of information coming in above and beyond the semantics, so you might feel there's a bit of a mismatch there. But I think what I'd try and say in response is, if you are a minimalist, then you've got this kind of bifurcated notion of content. You think that there's both these strict minimal contents floating around, and there's the enriched intuitive contents. And it might be that when you get evidence about productivity, it's revealing evidence about productivity about the one, about the understanding of the minimal content, but not necessarily about the other, about the speaker meaning. And so I guess what I really wanted to ask was about your third premise, the idea that a satisfactory explanation of productivity and systematicity requires an explanation of how intuitive propositions are determined. I wasn't quite sure about the grounds for that, and I guess it's because I'm not quite sure that intuitive propositions really are compositional. I mean, if you think that something like the kettle is black, the intuitive proposition for that is the kettle is black on the inside versus black on the outside, or whatever. It's not straightforwardly compositional in the way that, the minimal proposition is, and depending on what kinds of free pragmatic effects you're getting in there, and what kinds of things you take as the composing elements, I think there's going to be a real question about whether they're genuinely compositional.
Yeah. That's a good question. I agree that those are probably not compositional, but okay, I'm going to make here like a little comparison with contextualism. Even if they are not compositional, it's not the same as saying that those are not examples of productivity. If those are examples of productivity, and we want compositionality to explain productivity, then maybe, even if they are not fully compositional, compositionality would still help to explain those examples. Something that I didn't say that I forgot, maybe that, okay, maybe a semantic compositional theory is not all that you need to explain these examples, but it sure should play a role in explaining those examples, if those are examples of productivity. And well, at least I believe that it's not very controversial to say that those examples are examples of productivity, even if the intuitive propositions are not fully compositional. So to end my response, for example, what contextualists might do in general is that, okay, intuitive propositions are not fully compositional, but the content of a sentence is, even if it's not a full proposition. That content that is not a full proposition, it's compositional, and that helps explaining productivity, because that gives you like the content that it's expressed in every use of the sentence. So that gives you help, an aid to explain productivity, even if you need all these pragmatic mechanisms to explain how the intuitive proposition is determined.
So just maybe one more thing. But now I'm slightly losing track of the way the argument is going.
Okay.
Because now it's slightly sounding to me like a debate about whether or not the content that remains constant is truth valuable or not. And that's the kind of well-known debate here, obviously. But I thought I thought there was a new challenge to minimalism here, from the need to explain productivity and systematicity. And I guess I'm not quite seeing now what the new challenge is supposed to be here, because there is supposed to be a connection between minimal contents and intuitive contents. They're one of the clues that help us to get to the intuitive meaning at the end. And if we no longer think that the intuitive content is compositional, yeah, I guess I'm just slightly losing track of why we've got a new challenge here, as opposed to just the old question of whether those contents are truly valuable.
Okay, the new challenge is just to explain how those minimal compositions help us get to the intuitive propositions. I think that there's an explanation there that we don't have. The only thing that I want to point out that is that it's not obvious how that is explained, and we need such an explanation to see if minimalism is a good proposal. It's just that we need such an explanation. I'm not saying that that explanation is not possible, but I also believe that there are many alternatives, and that's a discussion that we should be having, I believe. Also, I believe in relation to the objection of Carsten and Stefano that if we can give such an explanation, then the response to them, I believe it's very straightforward. When they say that there is no role for the proposition, the response can be, hey, yes, there is a role. The proposition role is to explain productivity and systematicity and to have this function in helping explaining how productivity propositions are determined.
Actually, I wanted to say something I think Professor Borg really just said. Namely, I think this is not an argument against contextualism, because even a contextualist might agree with the fact that there is something which helps explain how intuitive propositions are determined. But the real challenge is to say if this something is truth conditional or not, because here you are not saying that minimal propositions are truth conditional. And Recanati, for instance, might agree with this, saying that yes, there is something, there are minimal propositions that help to determine, enrich the proposition, but the point is that this very minimal proposition is truth conditional or not.
Okay.
I think this is something you said.
Just I'm getting a little confused about something to say that the argument is not against contextualism. And of course, a contextualist would say that the content of a sentence, yes, the semantic content of a sentence is not completely truth conditional. So, in a way, what I'm asking is why. This is one way to put it. Why does this minimal proposition be the characteristic of these minimal propositions is that they are truth conditional? Why is this helpful for explaining productivity and systematicity? We have like these two options: the contextualist option, where the semantic contents are not truth evaluable, and the minimal propositions that they are truth evaluable. Why is one better than the other? What does the minimal proposition has that it's better explanation of how productivity happens? I don't know if that's
yes, but I think a contextualist might also explain the productivity without having a full truth conditional minimal proposition.
Okay, that's why this is not, I'm not discussing contextualism. I'm trying to push, to press the minimalist to give us an explanation that the contextualist already has. I believe that the explanation that it's an explanation the contextualist has, but the minimal semantics doesn't have. So I'm trying to push the minimalist to give us that explanation in order we have the full elements to judge the thing.
Thanks. So I understand what Kanati is saying, something like, okay, we have these minimal truth conditions, and he totally accepts them. And then how we get to the intuitive ones is just kind of based on those minimal ones. Like you just kind of change the constituents based on context. So this is the kind of compositionality notion he proposed in his 2010 book. So this would be a kind of proposition, a kind of a compositionality theory that you would like. I guess that would be attractive. This is something that you're asking from minimalists, right? And I think it's not very clear. This is actually an interesting notion of compositionality, because what I like about compositionality is that computers can do it, for example, that it's kind of mechanistic. And in the case of the Kanati's book, or his proposal, it's not really clear. This is interesting, in this case, like with this respect to this mechanism stuff, like this is an interesting notion. Also, I'm wondering whether it's right that we get our intuitions for productivity, or our arguments or evidence for productivity from intuitive truth conditions. It seems like we get them from, ideas about. The way I always learned about productivity is by people telling me about recursion. Like kind of recursive processes, and not really intuitive. Anything that is, like what the contextualists are talking about. So it's kind of in the same direction as Emma Borg was saying. Steph.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure what to say about the theory of Kanati. I'm not very versed about what we can say, but about the examples of productivity, I would think that a notion of productivity that is just reduced to things without context or recursive would be a notion of productivity that is too poor to explain language.
Well, I would just say language then is not compositional or productive. It's just all based on thought, right? Like thought is compositional, thought is productive. If you are interested in compositionality, and if you are interested in productivity, I think the best option for us would be to really look at the minimalist, strong notion of compositionality. That is the interesting one.
Thank you very much for your talk. And my question is also concerned with the intuitive propositions. And very simple that which proposition that you think is more intuitive, like John's talk, and John's talk related to Yao Ming. So I think that in different situations that maybe someone think that John's talk is more intuitive, but maybe for some other groups that we think that John is totally related to Yao Ming is more intuitive. So in your thesis, better can be something about whether we can have the judgment process or judgment standard to say that which is the intuitive concerning the sentence John is tall, and John is tall relative to someone, which is more relative, more intuitive.
Okay. My notion of the intuitive express propositions is a technical notion. I'm not speaking of the proposition that somebody believes is intuitive, but the proposition that it's commonly interpreted when we use language. I don't know if that was the question.
No, we can talk about it later.
Well, thank you.
All right, sorry for the delay, everyone, and thanks so much to Danielle for going ahead of me while I sorted this out. Turns out 2011 is not a very good vintage for MacBooks. So my talk is Idealization in Semantics, Truth Conditions for Radical Contextualists. my kind of project is I want to take a step back from these first order debates between particularly the minimalists and contextualists, and kind of try and take a sort of meta look at what's going on in this debate, primarily informed by somewhat recent work in the philosophy of science. So I'm going to start by just kind of setting up this debate, in particular looking at this challenge posed by the radical contextualists. Here I particularly have in mind Charles Travis, but similar sorts of arguments have been put forward by various Chomskyians, including Noam himself, but also people like Paul Petrosky or John Collins. Kind of relevance theorists you might think fit into this sort of camp, so I want to raise this sort of worry, and then look at these two main ways that people have responded to this worry. On the one hand, the moderate contextualist, which I kind of have in mind Jason Stanley and his friends, and then the minimalists such as Emma Borg and Ernie Lepore. And then I want to look at a kind of alternative way of just thinking about this whole debate, rather than this first order debate, you know, what can the minimalists explain, what can the contextualists explain, what flaws do these particular programs have. Instead, I think that we can view it kind of more from the perspective of modeling-based science as found in other special sciences, especially biology. So the challenge, the radical contextualists point to this apparent gap between sentence meaning, or something like character in Kaplan's sense, and truth conditions. So these Travis cases, which keep getting discussed, everyone should be pretty familiar with them. The thought is something like Pia, for whatever reason, decides to paint the red leaves on her Japanese maple green, and then her botanist friend comes over, and you know, I'm doing a project on chlorophyll production in green leaves. Do you have anything that I could use? Presumably a pretty terrible botanist, but that's what's going on. And Pia says, these leaves are green. Travis's intuition and those of many others is she said something false. And then later on her artist friend comes over and says, I'm doing a collage of all kinds of green stuff. Do you have anything I can use? Pia says, these leaves are green. Intuition here, she said something true. So the worry here is it seems like what's influencing the truth conditions of these utterances is something that goes beyond the kind of things that, you know, traditional formal semantics can handle. In particular, traditional formal semantics deals with indexicality and context sensitivity in general by saying the expression meaning gives us a function from specific aspects of context to content, in the sentential case truth conditions. But, at least so Travis claims, what's going on here is the way in which context is influencing the truth conditions doesn't go by way of being an argument for one of these sorts of these functions. So maybe we can think, or we should think, that indexicals like I or demonstratives like that say, you know, give me this particular object in the context, and then I'll map you onto some truth conditions. But Travis thinks that in cases like these leaves are green, the lexical item green doesn't say, you know, give me some particular aspect of this leaf, and I'll return something that I can contribute to a truth condition. And so the thought is, you know, kind of pretty intuitive. If truth conditions are context sensitive in ways that go beyond meaning or character, then truth conditional semantics seems to be in trouble, right? If truth conditional semantics says the goal of semantic theory is to come up with a way of computing truth conditions, and you do that by figuring out functions from context to content, but this context sensitivity in this sort of case doesn't look like it plays that same sort of role, then you might think truth conditional semantics needs reshaping. And this is exactly what a lot of people have been arguing. So like I said, obviously Travis, but even people who seem to care about doing science, like Chomsky and Petrosky and people like that, people are advocating that really the project of truth conditional semantics was a kind of mistake. These sorts of cases are supposed to show that truth conditions just aren't the proper target of semantic theory. You know, maybe we should be thinking about things in terms of, you know, perhaps constraints on on truth conditions, or ways of composing concepts, or these other sorts of things. So the standard way of defending truth conditional semantics, and there's good reason to defend it. Truth conditional semantics is the only semantic theory in which we've made any progress, so it would be nice if we didn't have to just get rid of that and start again. So there's good reason to defend truth conditional semantics, and there's very standard ways of doing this, in particular to try and kind of close this gap that we've been pointing to. And as with any gap, there's two ways of closing it. You can move one side or you can move the other. And the two positions on either side of this debate exemplify these two strategies. So the moderate contextualists, like I said, people like Stanley, what they try and do is show that actually the meanings of sentences, the characters, do show exactly the same degree of context sensitivity as the truth conditions that we get out of them. So in particular, they'll say, you know, given that we all know how to deal with indexicality generally following Kaplan, let's just do that for all of these examples. So, you know, give me your Travis case, these leaves of green, say, well, what is the aspect of the context that is playing a role here? Many people have suggested there's some kind of mereological thing going on. So there's something about which part of the leaf we care about. This is what Kennedy and McNally and Zoltan Jabo say. And so we say, look, the lexical item green comes with a variable which picks out something in the context about which part of the leaf we care about. So there's this is part of the syntax, part of our lexicon, that for each of these sorts of influences on truth conditions, there's some variable in the syntax which looks for that kind of parameter. On the other hand, minimalists argue that we shouldn't think that there are these sorts of syntactic variables, and they close the gap by moving the other side. They say the truth conditions here, they really aren't context sensitive in the way that they appear to be. So, you know, who knows exactly what it takes for something to be green? Ask a metaphysician. But either P is leaves are green or they're not. And so this will be true when she responds to the artist or to the botanist. It's true that it would be deeply misleading for her to tell her botanist friend that these leaves are green, and that kind of maybe clouds our judgment, and we hear and we say, you shouldn't really be saying these leaves are green, but perhaps strictly speaking they are. I mean, whether both of Pia's assertions turn out to be true or both false, kind of unclear, you know, more analysis needed. But the idea is, upon final metaphysical analysis, we'll work out that this sentence has the same truth value in both contexts. So, obviously, I don't have time to go over this entire debate, so I just want to raise two problems with these strategies that are kind of relevant for my purposes. Obviously, there's much more that can be said in each case. But the most worrying thing about the moderate contextualist strategy is it seems to be kind of unstable. Positing contextual parameters seems highly addictive. Once you get into that sort of behavior, you just keep doing it. You know, if Travis is right that the surface of the leaf matters, and if that motivates philosophers, or if we're very lucky, linguists, to start positing these sorts of syntactic variables, it looks like that same style of argument is going to force us to put more and more into the lexicon. So if Travis is right and the surface matters, we have all these other cases where, you know, lighting conditions might matter, or distance seems to matter. I mean, all kinds of things can influence the conditions under which we're willing to describe something as green or not. And, you know, obviously this works for all kinds of other sorts of predicates. And so it seems to be very difficult to kind of come up with a stopping point. You know, what is the set of syntactic parameters that we're supposed to be accounting for here? On the other hand, minimalism, it seems to be empirically inadequate, and not in the way that all theories are empirically inadequate and they make bad predictions. It's empirically inadequate in the sense that it kind of cuts itself off from what seems to be the central source of evidence for semantic theory. You know, how do we do semantics? How have we always done semantics? Well, let's get some sentences, let's intuit the conditions under which they'd be true, the conditions under which if one is true, then the other one would have to be true, and this sort of thing. And then we want to come up with a theory that best predicts these judgments. Once the minimalist says, I'm going to ignore our intuitions that Pia's sentence is true or false, it starts looking very difficult to see how we're going to evidentially ground a semantic theory. By cutting off truth value judgments, truth value intuitions, it starts looking like semantic theory is going to be free-floating in an inappropriate sort of way. So both of these are kind of methodological arguments. I said I wanted to take this kind of meta level. These aren't the kind of arguments that many other people are giving in this debate where it's, here's some sentences, I don't think your view can explain that, or here's how psychology works, your view doesn't fit in with that, or this sort of thing. These are both kind of methodological arguments. In particular, the methodology of kind of moderate contextualism leads to this sort of parametric explosion. We just get too much going on in the lexicon. That's not an empirical argument that says there isn't this much going on, but I start to feel nervous when I see I see my curly brackets with dozens and dozens of variables in there. And not just because then I might have to actually do some mathematics. On the other hand, like we said, the minimalist, again, this isn't, there could be perfectly good theories for which we have no evidence for. So this isn't an empirical argument against the minimalist, but it's, if the minimalist is right, semantics seems to be in trouble. How do we evidentially ground it? So there seems to be this kind of dilemma here. On the one hand, we're faced with this massive evidential complexity. Our intuitive judgments about truth conditions seem to be highly sensitive to indefinitely many phenomena. And then we as people trying to understand semantics are faced with this kind of dilemma. Either we incorporate this complexity into our theories and we get this sort of parametric explosion, or we ignore the evidence altogether. We just say, look, I'm not trying to account for our intuitive judgments here. Neither of these seem like particularly good strategies. So here's what I think, here's an alternative response, an alternative kind of analysis of what's going on in this debate, which I hope can kind of manage to steer between these two unfortunate methodological positions. So the radical contextualist, as we said, points to this indefinite range of influences on truth conditions. This seems to be exactly the situation that we are in almost all special science that we're doing. We're trying to understand some target phenomenon, but it's massively causally complex. There's just indefinitely many things that influence its behavior. So take a kind of simple case, say that I'm a biologist and I'm trying to understand the behavior of some ecosystem. I'm trying to predict population growth or something. We have all of these nice kind of differential equations and things for modeling population growth. So the simplest model includes something like the size of predator and prey populations, as well as things like birth rate and death rate for these different populations. But obviously those aren't the only causal influences on these sorts of systems. If a meteor strikes, the population will fluctuate pretty significantly, independent of what the antecedent birth rates and death rates were. If Dick Cheney turns up with his shotgun, that might radically reduce the number of birds in the environment, again, in a way that my models aren't going to capture. So my thought is, well, what do other special scientists do when they're confronted with this sort of problem? And it strikes me that they do not do what either the minimalist or the moderate contextualist do. They don't try and kind of close this gap in this way, try and come up with some way to describe the environment in such a way that it really closely approximates our such a way that the environment and our model or target, our theory, really closely mesh up with it. In particular, consider this, pushing this analogy beyond where it should. Here's what the minimalist does in this sort of situation. They just deny that the thing is sensitive in this way. They say, truth conditions really aren't sensitive to all of these contextual. Of course, they say our judgments on truth conditions are, but the target that we're after, the system of setting up truth conditions, that itself is independent of all of these causal phenomena. On the other hand, the moderate contextualist has this kind of weird sort of pre-adaptation view where they say there's some antecedent fact about this population which was just waiting for the meteor to strike, and then when it does, we have this well-behaved mathematical system which predicts that this. But that's not the strategy that biologists tend to take. Instead, what biologists do is they produce a whole kind of barrage of overlapping but different models, each of which idealizes in different sorts of ways, each of which includes some aspects of the target that it wants to capture but ignores many others. And you can get kind of predictable trade-offs in which of these models are going to be good for doing which sorts of different things. So on the one hand, you can have these very complex models, so take my standard population dynamics models and add stuff for distribution of food, add stuff for spatial distribution of predators, add stuff for hormones in the environment. All of these sorts of things we can incorporate into our models to make them more accurate and more precise in a given case. But the problem with doing that is it makes them very specific. They're very kind of tailor-suited to a specific environment, and so they don't have the kind of generality that we want. Whereas my original population model, where it just has 3 or 4 parameters, that can apply pretty well to a very wide range of different ecosystems. And so rather than choosing between them, do I want a general model that makes inaccurate predictions in a given case, or do I want a very specific and very accurate model which doesn't apply widely? The biologists just say, let's just do both of these things. You work on the general models, I'll work on the specific models, and we can make progress by this kind of proliferation. Yeah, that's what I just said. So I want to say, as you might well predict by this point, that we should think of the debate between minimalists and contextualists in the same sort of way. What the minimalist is trying to do is come up with a fairly high-level description of kind of semantic systems which apply to just about everyone. So we don't want to, the minimalist thinks we don't want to build into our semantic system something like, when applying the term green, I want to pay attention to which surface I'm interested in. While there are situations in which that might matter, in general we don't want to do that. I just don't care most of the time which surface I'm talking about. So, treat green like any other monadic predicate. It has its, perhaps disquotationally specified semantics, and that gives us a way of doing kind of standard compositional stuff, and we get this fairly high-level, relatively simple system. On the other hand, the contextualists want to say, look, there are situations in which the surface matters. PS case is a situation just like that, so let's construct models in which we do make reference to that parameter, and that's the way in which we're going to make accurate predictions in specific cases. Sure, it makes our model more complex, and sure, it makes it less general, because there's all these other cases where we don't have the same sort of influence, but when we're not forced to choose between these two different models, then these sorts of worries don't matter so much. So broadly the idea is, even if the radical contextualist is right, we shouldn't infer from that truth conditional semantics is as a whole misguided. Truth conditional semantics should instead be seen as the proliferation of more or less idealized models of linguistic competence. Yeah, I mostly said all of this. Good. Yeah. So we started with these kinds of worries that the moderate contextualist seems to get into this kind of once you can't stop situation where they just keep introducing contextual parameters. The worry there is we don't want to make it the case that our general semantic theories have this massive level of complexity. But if what we're doing is constructing a kind of one-off model of a particular conversational interaction, then we can just start incorporating whatever contextual parameters matter. If it's a highly unusual situation, we might include many such things. But in general, we're not going to have to do that, and so we can kind of pick and choose which parameters we want to include, so we don't need to worry about this sort of explosion. On the other hand, this minimalist, the worry that we have with the minimalist, you're cutting yourself off from the data. Well, the minimalist on the kind of picture that I'm advocating is saying, sure, I'm ignoring particular individual bits, particular individual pieces of data. I'm not trying to account for what's going on in Pia's case. I'm trying to get these very high-level, abstract, general understanding of how semantics works. And I'm okay if that makes the right predictions most of the time, if that tells me what a compositional system has to look like in order for, to understand general linguistic competence. But of course, there are going to be cases where, because I've idealized the way from the important causal factors, I'm going to make bad predictions. But again, this is just exactly what you see in the rest of the special sciences. A very general population model abstracts away from some data, and then it says, look, I'm not trying to account for the system in which the chemical plant is pumping all kinds of hormones into the lake. I'm just trying to account for population dynamics in general. So in general, there's this kind of dilemma in the special sciences of, do we get this kind of trade-off between accuracy in particular cases and generality, or complexity and simplicity? And the solution in the special sciences is precisely to start multiplying these models, come up with some very general, but in particular cases not particularly accurate models, and other very much more complicated, but given that they're tailored to a particular system, they can make accurate predictions there, sort of cases. All of this. Good. Thanks so much, everyone. I look forward to seeing you.
Thanks very much. So I think there's going to be lots of questions, so I'll try and be quick, but I really enjoyed that. So I had 3 comments on the question, so I'll go through them quickly. So the first one on the problems for minimalism. So I guess one point is I just kind of want to totally disagree with the idea that that we should take our intuitive judgments of truth conditions as the central basis for semantics. I mean, I guess kind of, there's lots of things I never know whether I'm really sure I believe, but that is one point about minimalism that I really feel committed to. We should just think of that as a kind of massive interaction effect, and it's been a real mistake in the history of semantics to think that that's what the explanatory goal of semantics was. So I guess, and that's kind of like the stuff you were saying at the end, that we should be thinking about semantics as offering this generalized account, not as doing this kind of specific thing. So in a way, I kind of just want to agree with that, but then I don't think it follows that minimalism is cut off from its empirical evidence. I mean, that's kind of the point of the talk yesterday was, just to try and show that there's some other stuff going on. So I don't think those 2 points necessarily run together. Okay, and then on the kind of positive account of idealization, I mean, in a little bit of a way, this way you've got of rendering the debate is a bit like ways that the debate's been rendered before, and I think you could definitely take minimalism and some kind of contextualism to run alongside as just having different kinds of explanatory aims. But you can only do that if contextualists stop telling me that I can't have minimal propositions. There's a real debate there if they think my things just can't exist. If they're okay with them, then fine, we can just be doing different explanatory roles. I think that's okay. But then the question, so this way of treating the debate reminded me, I think the way I'm most familiar with it is debates about logical form. And so Quinian kind of approach to logical form that says, look, it's just a kind of pragmatic choice about what logical system we use for rendering a logical form. There's lots of perfectly consistent ways of doing it, and we just choose whichever one we think we really like. And that sounds a little bit like this kind of choice matter here with the sciences. But it looks like that notion of logical form isn't the one we need if we're doing something like Chomskyan semantic or Chomskyan syntax because we want it to be something that's genuinely a part of the sentence, that's psychologically realized in us when we're coming to it. And so I wonder whether we get too much distance with this kind of idealization.
Good, great. So let me see if I can hit all these points. So firstly, I certainly agree that I think it would be a mistake to think the main goal of semantics is to predict and explain particular intuitive judgments. But that doesn't show that these aren't the data for our theory. So I think you're totally right that in many cases these are going to be massive interaction effects of all kinds of different things. I mean, even aside from the debate about what the proper semantic theory is, our linguistic judgments are going to depend on our general background beliefs, they're going to, what we have for breakfast, whatever it is. So certainly, one shouldn't think that semantic theory on its own is going to predict these sorts of things. But I think that still the worry can be raised about, they still do seem to be the data. I mean, this is exactly the same in syntax, right? Syntactic judgments of acceptability or unacceptability or interaction effects. But nonetheless, if you start telling linguists, if you start telling syntacticians, you're not allowed to use judgments of acceptability to evaluate your theory. And they just don't know what else they can do. I mean, one of them will say, have you looked at linguistic corpora? I would say, I don't care about them. But in general, that is the way that we do. It's certainly right that we shouldn't think the semantic theory on its own predicts these interaction effects, that what it is for something to be an interaction effect is this one particular theory isn't going to account for them. But the data, I think, is the kind of thing where we should take semantic theory and plug it into something else, and then it will be. So we should still think that these are the data here, but then we can think that there's a kind of gap between data and theory, in the sense that it's always open to us to explain kind of anomalous judgments from the perspective of the semantic theory, by pointing to the fact that they're interaction effects. But still, those are the kinds of things that we want to be dealing with. So that was one thing. I think on the logical form point, I mean, the Quinian fluid is we have all of these roughly equivalent systems. It's a little more complicated, but do I want to use Polish notation or do I want to use Begriffsschrift notation? That's a purely pragmatic decision. Which model to use is pragmatic in a slightly different sense. What do I want to do with my model? Do I want to predict what's going on in this case, or do I want to come up with so these models do different things in a way that I think the logical form stuff doesn't. What else was there?
I've got another question, so we can talk about
okay, yeah, that sounds good.
Right, so on a personal note, very good to see that UCLA still churns out very good philosophers of language.
Which is very kind.
Right, so I wanted to ask you a little, I like all of this, I think it's very good to highlight this. I know very little about philosophy of science, so maybe I'm making a distinction. But one way of looking at idealization is a little bit like, I get close enough. When I do mechanics, I don't take attrition into account. But throughout the experiments, I get close enough, and that's good enough.
Right.
The other thing is to say, I don't take attrition into account, but my model gives you the perfectly accurate relationship between mass and force and acceleration. And I think the second one is the one that we are interested in. We're not happy to be close enough. We want to hone in exactly on what we're interested in, affording to ignore all of it. So in our case, the question becomes, so what is that semantics gives us, the simple model gives us really well?
Yeah. Good, yeah, so I think you're getting at that there's just a variety of different things we might want our models to do. And so, maybe the analogy isn't so appropriate. Biologists, they might actually have stuff that matters, right? They might actually need to predict, are these birds going to fly through an air path, right? An airplane path. And so they need to make accurate predictions. Whereas when we're doing semantics, we're just, it's pure theorizing. And so this kind of predictive power doesn't matter so much to us. What matters is realism, right? We want to describe the actual mechanisms of our psychology. And so when we're doing that, if I want to make a prediction, I better include parameters for things like friction or whatever in our models. But if what I want to do is, what Newton did, you just want to say, well, force is mass times blah, 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 right? And so maybe semantics is doing this latter thing. I'm just trying to understand the structure of the semantic system, and sure, there's going to be exogenous influences, but those aren't the kind of things semanticists should care about. Maybe natural language processors want to care about that. If I work for Google, I care about these sorts of things because I'm predicting stuff. But we in the semantics world shouldn't. I think there's a few things one can say. Firstly is I think we still have this same sort of methodological worry that the way that we assess which theory is most realistic, is most accurate, is by seeing what things it can predict and what things it can't predict. And so we can't really totally cut ourselves off from that. Even if our goal is strictly to describe the structure of the linguistic faculty, we better be able to incorporate stuff that enables us to make the right sorts of predictions. Secondly, that's I think the kind of first slightly easier sort of response. I think the more difficult but possibly more interesting response is, look, if the radical contextualists are right, and again, if the right, per impossibile, given that yesterday we were shown why they weren't, but if the radical contextualist is right, they're going to say the model that we're using in semantics, where it's kind of analogous to what we do in syntax, where we've just got this kind of computationally neat, well-defined system in our heads, and then when we do semantics, what we want to do is just stick some lambda terms on our trees. That's the wrong model entirely. The human semantic competence just isn't this kind of well-defined computational system, and so there's no question of have we accurately described this. Whatever we're going to do in that circumstance is going to be a more or less idealized description of what actually matters for human semantic judgments. So I think there's just an empirical question here, obviously. What is the structure of the human semantic system? If the minimalists are right, then all of the sorts of extra variables and parameters will be deviations from this goal of achieving a realistic picture. If the radical contextualist is right, that's not the case. They're going to say, just like we shouldn't think of an ecosystem as a kind of computational system, what we're trying to do is describe its workings, then we're going to have to keep incorporating more and more because it is more and more sensitive in these sorts of ways. So I think kind of at this stage of debate, assuming this question is still open, it's not obvious that the realism objection kind of cuts much ice. Maybe down the road, once we know exactly what's going on in the linguistic faculty, then we can say, ignore this predictive stuff, because that's just bringing in friction into our mechanical models. Really what we care about is the relation between force and mass and acceleration in the abstract. But until we have, I think, a much better epistemic position with respect to what's going on in the mind, I think we still should be doing this sort of multiple modeling thing.
Can I do a couple of follow-ups? They're all follow-ups. So you're assuming, this is a follow-up to what you said just now. You assume that semantics is part of psychology, right?
I do. I am assuming that, at least for the purpose of this talk.
Yeah, and then you're assuming. I don't think that psychologists really, do this kind of model pluralism thing. They're also I agree that they're more realistic, or realists about their objective, or what they want to do.
I think it depends on the psychologist.
I'm not sure. So that's a really big debate on predictive coding, for example, and they have really extremely good their models are really predictively, like when it comes to prediction, they're really successful, but prediction comes really cheap, and a lot of people are arguing, well, prediction is, like it's not really enough to give you an accurate model of the mind or how the mind works. So I'm not sure if this is.
Sure. So certainly no one is saying getting accurate predictions is sufficient for having a realistic model, i.e. a model which actually describes the target. No one's saying that. I mean, I think that in psychology, exactly what methodological strategy they adopt depends a lot on their kind of underlying metaphysics of mind. I think the more computationalist people are, the more likely they are to be trying to do the Chomsky syntax thing. If you just think the mind is a computational system, it's well behaved, and so we can model it. I mean, there's a sense in which we think we're not modeling it. I'm just trying to draw the flow chart for the computer that's operating in my mind. If that's the kind of picture you have, people seem to be much less willing to think of what they're doing as providing one model among many. On the other hand, I think unfortunately, the computational theory of mind isn't universal. There are plenty of psychologists who, because they're doing this kind of much more quantitative, much more predictive sort of activity, they tend to be much more willing to talk about different sorts of models. So I'm thinking in particular of the like dynamic systems pictures of the mind. I think they pretty often quite willing to think of psychology in this multiple modeling sort of way. It's certainly rare for someone to think dynamical systems, that's one model and the computational model is another. Empirical science, they don't tend to play nice together. But I mean, my view is that they should, but you're right. I mean, I'm not here just saying here's what all psychologists do. This is one strategy the psychologists adopt, and I think it's the main strategy the biologists adopt.
So just one so you make a distinction between, it's really short, intuitive truth condition, intuitive evidence in psychology should be based on intuition, and then you are saying it shouldn't. But then I think there should be a distinction between initial intuitive truth conditions and like kind of intuitive truth conditions. So sometimes the minimal truth conditions should also be the intuitive ones, right? That was really.
That's fine. I mean, if the minimal propositions are the intuitive truth conditions, then so much the better for minimalism. They often aren't. I'm saying in order to have empirically evaluable psychology, we need to have intuition. I mean, I also didn't say in general psychology should be about intuitions. I think linguistics, as a matter of fact, it is, and perhaps must be in the current, but that doesn't mean that psychophysics has to be. So it's not a general claim about the method. The claim about intuition is specific to linguistics.
You mentioned the objection against the indexicalist approach, that there is no principle linked to the number of variables or parameters we need. But do we really need so many of them? Take the green case. Right? Once we specify the surface of the object we are interested in, and maybe the condition of illumination, and maybe a level of approximation, so ignore the threshold, the venation, or little marks or stains on the leaves. That's it.
So I think the thought is that the radical contextualist at least suggests no. I mean, once we allow the kind of comparative truth evaluation test, it does look like we're going to keep generating these. I mean, as Emma was saying yesterday, just read a Charles Travis paper or talk to him, and you will just go through. Here's dozens of contextual factors that influence our judgments of whether we're going to count something as green or not. Matt Hansen has a paper where he's kind of going through like the history of art. Like, here's all the different things that artists have to think about when they want to depict a tree as green, right? And so, distance matters, air quality matters, whatever else. I can't remember all of the. But it does look like assuming this sort of method. I mean, Lepore and Capellan do the same sort of thing in their book, where they want to show that the moderate contextualist kind of reduces to radical contextualism, and they just go through all these examples, you know, how tall is this giraffe? Should we count the hair on top of its earbrow? And they go through case after case, which is supposed to convince us that, yeah, if we start positing these contextual parameters, we're going to keep going for a long time. Yeah, it's hard to work out exactly how long, you know, we can't do a mathematical induction on this and say there's infinitely many, but I think there's a kind of intuitive feeling that these things can just keep going.
Thank you. I also like very much your presentation. I have like two worries. The first one is that you get good reasons to use both models to explain things in practice, but I'm not sure if those reasons are enough to say that there is no disagreement between contextualists and minimalists, because they both saying that they have semantic theories, and semantic theories are incompatible. So in practice it might be fruitful to use both of them, but there might still be a disagreement. My second worry is very similar, because okay, in practice it might be very fruitful to use both of them to give explanations, but to have the debate is also very fruitful. Both of our theories advance, and we now have better contextualist theories and better minimalist theories because of the discussion that they have, so that the discussion is also a very fruitful thing to have.
Great, yeah, no, that all sounds exactly right. So I certainly agree that, you know, I don't take myself to be saying there's just no disagreement between the minimalist and the contextualist. But I think there's a sense in which what I want to say is there's a kind of ideological disagreement, but actually, methodologically, there need not be. So certainly there's a disagreement between them. Minimalists think theirs is the correct semantic theory, and contextualists think theirs is the correct semantic. That's a disagreement, right? They can't both be the capital T correct theory. What I want to say is, it may even turn out that one of them is the correct theory down the line, but that doesn't mean that, you know, what we should be doing now is working out which one the correct theory is, rather than doing this kind of multiple modeling strategy. I mean, again, to, you know, kind of keep running this analogy, the question of what is the correct way to think about this ecosystem depends what you want to do. It's true that there may be a kind of descriptive thing that's supposed to be going on in semantics. It doesn't quite match up there. But I don't want to be denying that there's any disagreement, but I want to point out that the disagreement can happen at multiple levels, and just adopting one of these models for the sake of understanding what's going on in a particular case is perfectly consistent with believing to be true any of the theories, right? I mean, so the kind of the setup of the paper is, let's assume, for the sake of argument, that the radical contextualist is right. We can still do semantics, good old-fashioned truth conditional semantics in the same sort of way, and that might well be the way to proceed if that's happening. So the kind of the talk is in the scope of this counterfactual conditional, which says neither of these theories are right. But of course, if one of them is right, that shouldn't stop us from modeling in the other sort of way as well. Can you remind what your second point was? There was 2 points there, and I thought I addressed the first, but what was the second? Because it was interesting, I wanted to get to it, but I've forgotten what it is.
I think that you already responded. I just, what was that? Okay, that's a fruitful way to work, to use both models,
yeah.
But to keep the discussion going, it's also fruitful, so...
Great. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, good. So, I mean, there's a psychological question of, can we do good science if what we recognize is our theory isn't the right one? So if we all come to, you know, Travis's best of all possible worlds, and we all agree that radical contextualism is correct, I'm saying in that world we could still do true conditional semantics. But you're totally right. There's just a kind of question about the social structure of science, whether that would happen and whether we would still produce the good work that moderate contextualists and minimalists are doing. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to predict what goes on in some future state of science, but it certainly doesn't seem obvious to me that scientists can't really further modeling even within whole theories which are known to be false. I mean, there's still, it's kind of bizarre to me, there's still people working out how best to do Newtonian mechanics of stuff, right? Because we know Newtonian mechanics isn't the true theory, but we still want to build a bridge, right? So so it does seem like the fact that whatever theory we end up with, the fact that that's the right one doesn't seem obvious that it's going to stop good work of the good work of kind of fine-tuning these respective theories and playing them off one another in the way that philosophy of language and semantics does well today.
Okay, then I don't know. I feel that you responded me better the first time than this one, because
so let's just go back to it.
Because okay, I'm not saying the thing that I was saying was not about having good work made on the theory, but I believe that the good work that we are doing on both theories, it's also because both theories are making objections to each other. So that discussion is what makes that our theories advance. So I'm hoping, well, maybe you're not suggesting me that we shouldn't have the discussion, but okay.
No, so I certainly, I certainly agree. I think we should keep having this sort of discussion even, and I don't see any obvious reason why I should think that couldn't happen. But yeah, that's great. All right, thanks so much, everyone.